Koto Markie here, looking at the screen again, so look away if you get epilepsy or migraine or anything triggered by that jazzing effect. We're a low-tech channel, and that's the way it is, really. And I want to feature a channel that I enjoy watching, which isn't a low-tech channel, which is the channel Storied. Although they also use the name Monstrum, so I don't know, a bit confusing with the branding there, but I'm not one to talk. I've no production value at all on my channel. So a big channel, 913,000 subscribers, and this is the main presenter. I think it's the only presenter. I don't know if they have other presenters. Where's she gone? There she is. And I can't remember her name. It's not actually in the description, I don't think. She's a doctor, I think a PhD probably rather than a medical doctor, but I don't know for sure. What does the description box say? Blah, 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 blah. Oh yeah, Dr. Emily Zarka. Okay. But look, there's a whole bunch of people involved in the production. And then my channel is just little old me, and no wonder I'm nothing like the production value of a channel like this. Anyway, she's talking about changelings, so she talks about all kinds of things, you know, the kind of classic monster, and talks about the some of the legends that might have led to it and the history of the beliefs, and she's let's have a look at some of her content. Remember, so videos. Christmas monsters. World War I pilots think monsters were sabotaging their planes. Oh, I haven't watched that one. I want to watch that. Why is English awash in sailors' jargon? So it's Grendel's mother, linguistics of God. So it's quite diverse. It's not all monsters, but there's a lot of monsters in there. King Kong revealed America's fear. So great channel. Check it out. Show it some love. I'll put a link to the channel in the description box below. If it's not there when you look, it's because I ain't done it yet. Be patient. But this video inspired me a bit today. This one about changelings. So I'll let it run in the background. I'm sure they won't grab me for copyright because I'm paying tribute and promoting the channel. Changelings. So for those of you that don't know what a changeling is, a changeling is a monster in human disguise. A changeling, generally it was a belief that the fairy folk would steal your baby and replace it with one of their own offspring, leaving you to bring it up, and it occurs a lot in folklore, and this video talks about how it occurs in folklore and in literature, and it talks a lot about it talks about the Victorian age and how it was very popular in the Victorian period as an idea in literature and things like that. So yeah, I don't think it's necessarily the fairy realm, but that's where I've come across it. Certainly is the idea that it's a changeling from the fairy realm. So have a watch of this video. This gives you a good background on what changelings are all about. And the reason I wanted to talk about it, I've been reading a lot of Dion Fortune lately. I say reading, I've been listening to audiobooks on YouTube. YouTube's great, isn't it? I always feel like I'm cheating when I'm reading audiobooks. Or listening to audiobooks and not reading them. God, all the references here, like Martin Luther, all kinds of things. But I've been studying Dion Fortune. Now, Dion Fortune is a pen name, nom de plume. She was a woman who only lived into her 50s. She died very young, but was prolific as a writer and an occultist. And she wrote books, and she also wrote a lot of articles, and some of the books that are published under her name are actually collations of the articles. So I've been reading some of those, and also reading some of the fiction, because even the fiction, she kind of, she states that the fiction is illustrations of real things. and real principles or real things that happened to her or people that she knew of. So she was a member of an esoteric order, and then I think she founded her own esoteric order. If you think of kind of Freemasonry, but more spooky wooky, think of a cross between, because people aren't that familiar with these esoteric orders today. They were a big thing in the like Victorian period and early part of the 19th century, but people don't really talk about them so much now. So think of a cross between Freemasonry and Wicca, and that will probably give you a flavour of what these organisations were like. I think I've talked about them in some other videos. Maybe I'll talk about them some more in the video of its own. But these, I'm gonna have to switch this off. These images are distracting me. They're just so pretty weird, aren't they? I mean, I like a good, weird, disturbing image, don't get me wrong. Let's just pause it. The woman looks like she's eating a battered sausage. So, where was I before I was so rudely interrupted? So there were what they often call magical lodges or esoteric societies or occult societies. And you would have different grades of initiation, and the people leading the organisations would be of a high grade, and it was a kind of very educational, progressive kind of system. And she was part of that, and she, without revealing the secrets, because they're very secretive, these organisations, mainly because they think some of the knowledge that they share would be dangerous in the hands of people who aren't being mentored and tutored and haven't been kind of vetted, because the membership was very select for these organisations. But she was quite happy to share certain concepts and certain occult beliefs, and share some of her own experiences without compromising the confidentiality of the organisations that she was a member of. And said some very interesting things. Now, this is where I think a lot of these kind of superstitions and folk beliefs, particularly from earlier times, it's easy to kind of laugh at them and think, oh, they're very primitive, and how did people believe that shit? And can you really imagine that a non-human entity would steal your baby and replace it with one of their... Why would they even do that? What would be the purpose of doing that? What do they gain? They get a human baby. What's the value of a human baby? So they've got a cuckoo in their nest, as well as placing a cuckoo in your nest. So what's that about? But sometimes when you look a bit deeper beyond these things, there's a possible truth to them. Now, I'm somebody that my mind sees connections and links between all kinds of things that other people wouldn't necessarily see, or if they see, they wouldn't necessarily agree with. They would say, well, that's not connected, that's a different thing. And this is a personality thing, and it can be associated with ADHD, a different kind of way the brain works, with neurodiversity in general. And I have ADHD and other neurodivergent conditions. So this is something that I do in my videos, is I look at something and I think, that reminds me of something else, and I draw parallels between things. Now, take what I say with a bit of a pinch of salt, because I'm not saying that the one thing equals the other, that it's the same thing. I'm just saying that's interesting because it has resonances with something else. And there's two things that I want to bring up in relation, to changelings, and particularly the material that was brought up in this really good video by Storied. Is one thing that Dion Fortune talked about was that sometimes it would be possible to give birth to a non-human baby. I'm going to pause there because it's quite a statement, isn't it? But now I'm going to qualify it, and it won't be quite as dramatic as it originally sounded. So what her belief was, that sometimes by some kind of accident, a soul, this is in the context of reincarnation, that a soul that wasn't actually destined for a human existence, that was destined for a fey existence, you know, by which she would mean like a nature spirit or an elemental spirit, would be, you know, in between incarnations, and for whatever reason might come into the body at conception of a human mother and father. So it's a perfectly normal baby from a spiritual point of view. Sorry, from a physical point of view. But from a soul point of view, the soul that inhabits that body would be very different to most people, coming from a different place. And it's interesting because the changeling, that was one of the things about the changelings, is that, you know, changeling baby would, you know, look a bit strange maybe, although that's the physical, or behave a bit strangely, or seem to be, you know, more fairy than human. And also, you know, a lot you know, I think, as in the video, is an excuse to you know, either abuse or kill children who were had what we would call birth defects or intellectual disabilities, and that often happened. So quite interesting. So sort of Dion Fortune, she does give an example in one of her books of fiction of somebody that's born into a physical body but is a fae, but actually prefers to, you know, spend a lot of their time living outdoors, in the woods, and actually it was able to communicate and commune and kind of cavort, it's a good word, isn't it, cavort, with the fairy folk, which is kind of interesting. So is there a bit of an overlap? You know, if we're looking at like a Venn diagram, you've got the whole changeling belief system, which is quite broad. You know, does that overlap with the fact that, you know, sometimes a spirit that was, you know, had spent a whole string of incarnations as a elemental or nature spirit is born into the wrong body? Which is very interesting, isn't it? And the other thing I wanted to bring into the equation, Doreen Virtue. Okay, so Doreen Virtue, interesting name. She says it was definitely her birth name. It's not something she chose. Doreen Virtue, you may be aware of her. She talked a lot about indigo children. So indigo children, you know, that kind of, you know, that again, Venn diagram overlaps with the changeling, and maybe the incarnation of a fairy soul. And she wrote this book, which I ended up buying. I went to see a psychic who was talking about some of the material from this book, about different people being identified as certain personality types, or in fact soul types. I can't remember what the name of this bloody book is now. If I think of it, I'll put it in the description box. It was a tiny little, when I bought it, I thought I was buying a proper book. It's a tiny book. It was like a booklet more than a book, but it was interesting. It was I'd saying that there's I haven't got it. I lent it to somebody, so I haven't got it for reference. But it's saying that there's I think she identified four types, and they were sort of basically kind of people who were a bit different, because of the nature of the type of soul that had incarnated into their body. So one was like, I think maybe like a master or something like that. One was a star. I think maybe, did she use the word star seed or something, or star person? So that's somebody that had an incarnation on another planet. And then there was one that was particularly related to kind of fairy folk. But there are about four, and there was this questionnaire in there. You know, are you like this? Do you know, you're the kind of questions about your preferences and your behaviours and things like that. And I filled in the questionnaire, and actually came out that I was all of these weird kind of abnormal, rare types. So, you know, a little sip of water. And then I thought about this afterwards, because I was kind of quite skeptical from the beginning, really, but kind of intrigued, which is normally, that's my starting point, really, is I'm skeptical about everything, but intrigued by everything. And then that was before I realised I was neurodiverse, because I was diagnosed late. And it was a kind of my kind of awareness of neurodiversity as it related to me was a very gradual process. So first of all, I recognised I was ADHD. Then it was a long while after that I identified autism, then PDA, dyspraxia. Dyscalculia was the first thing I identified. When I went to be assessed for that, the assessor said, you think you probably got dyspraxia as well. And then it's a long time before I recognised ADHD, probably because I had the wrong idea about ADHD, as most people do. Watch my videos on that, by the way, and I'll put you right. It all came, and then and it's still unfolding. I'm learning more about myself and things like that. So, but what I'm trying to say here is that I think what these questionnaires were doing, not in an evidence-based kind of clinically accurate kind of screening questionnaire kind of way, but they were the kind of questions that would identify people who were neurodiverse or neurodivergent in different ways. Now you could argue that it's the same thing. You could argue that neurodivergence, co-occurs with being a soul from a different realm to the normal human realm, and that's what's behind it. I wouldn't argue that. But again, I'd say there's probably an overlap, there's probably an overlap. It's another set on the Venn diagram, which is now, getting quite crowded, that overlaps with all these things. So that was interesting. And indigo children, to me, it seemed a little bit like a kind of compensation for having a child that is neurodivergent, because neurodivergent is a relatively new term. Before that, people just used to talk about developmental disorders, and it was all about something wrong with you, and that's still around. They're still called developmental disorders. So you could say, so it was going back along. If you had a child that was on the autistic spectrum, that would be a source of shame for people. Or if you had a child that was dyspraxic or dyslexic or any of these things, it'd be oh no, something's gone wrong. I've got a bad one. It can't be my real child. It must be a changeling. Perhaps I can swap it back. And I think the whole indigo child kind of movement, I have to say, it's not something I've studied in depth. So if you know a lot about this, you might want to politely correct me. But I think there was an element of, my child's special. They're an indigo child. They're spiritually advanced. They're here to change the world and teach us, and blah blah blah. And maybe that's true as well on another level. Add that to the Venn diagram. But I thought that was interesting. So what I'm talking about really, I suppose I'm just drawing parallels and overlaps with some other things in life. So there's the Dion Fortune, and then there's the Doreen Virtue. Now, Doreen Virtue, this is an aside. This is a channel full of tangents. This is a conversational channel. Don't expect it to be scripted and neat and tidy. There's a stream of consciousness presentation style, because I'm neurodivergent. And this is how my particular neurodivergence manifests itself. She was big on, she was involved in indigo. I'm not sure if she invented the term, coined the term indigo child, or whether somebody else did and she just did some work on it. But she did do this book on, I think it was four different personality types that were all about non-human incarnation. And she now has, and she was big on oracle cards. So if you think about like tarot cards, and then kind of with the birth of the new age, everybody was making their own kind of versions of tarot cards. So so oracle cards might use some of the sort of the archetypes of the tarot. in a different form with different artwork, or they might kind of go off in a completely different direction. But you get a pack of cards basically, and they would have, you know, lovely artwork on, and usually they'd be on a theme. So you'd get ones that were kind of like mermaids, or ones that were angels, or goddesses, or that kind of thing. And she did quite a lot of those as well. That was something that she was big on. And I think she identified as a psychic as well. And she's has renounced all of this and become a fundamentalist Christian, and is now saying that everything that she did before she was born again was, you know, quite literally the work of the devil. And she's got things on her website about listing every, you know, going in, doing it like an A to Z of New Age practices, right from, you know, complementary therapies and crystals, and her you know, divination cards, all that kind of thing, and yoga, and saying that all these things are the work of the devil. So that's interesting. It's kind of fascinating, really, how she's switched from one thing to the other. She's lost a lot of money through it, because she's saying that she's no longer taking any income from, because her work, some of her work was done with other people, with collaborations, especially like her cards. I don't think she's an artist, or she's not known for her art. So there's some of these oracle cards were her and a colleague. So I don't know what's happening to her share of the income from that, whether she's still taking that and diverting it to, you know, maybe a Christian charity or a church or something, or I think she's just not taking anything from not taking any income from those things anymore. It's interesting. So there was a progression to it. You can actually follow her kind of progression towards becoming Christian. She started to get more and more interested in Jesus, and Jesus was coming up more and more in her readings and her divination and that kind of thing. But first of all, she was kind of seeing Jesus as, you know, I think like a in a more eclectic way, like as an ascended master, you know, one of many enlightened souls over the centuries. And then eventually, you know, Jesus is the only way, and has gone down that route, really. That's a long tangent, but it's an interesting one. I find it quite fascinating, really. I find it fascinating when people have these major, you know, shifts. They cross the Rubicon, you know, from one thing to another. I was going to do a video on that, actually, and I still might. Particularly about, you know, people that come from occult traditions to Christianity. So yeah, look forward to that. Will probably come out at some point. I've got a few thoughts on that. If you've got any thoughts on that, let me know. So in a nutshell, then, I just wanted to draw some parallels with what's talked about in this video by Storied, with the concept raised by, unfortunately, it's not the only person to raise that, you know, but it was her that was talking about it specifically, this idea of somehow some wires can get crossed on the other side, and you can end up with a pixie baby. And then the whole idea of, you know, star seeds and stuff. And today there are more and more people, and I've covered this in other videos as well, identifying as non-human, which is very interesting. I've done a video on that. I think there's a big correlation with that and autism. So watch my video on the 6th domain of autism with that one for my thoughts on that. But there are, you know, people call themselves other kin, and they don't feel that they're human, which again, you know, brings you back to neurodivergence again. In neurodivergence, you feel, you know, often people feel, and I felt like a cuckoo in the nest. People often think, oh, I must have been adopted because I don't seem to fit with my family. And then they often think, well, I think I must, you know, I don't fit with humanity, so I must come from somewhere else and be something else. So I think sometimes it's just a response to a feeling of alienation, and actually the root cause is neurodivergence. But it's all messy, isn't it? It's all muddled. You know, life is messy and muddled. You know, things aren't clear and crisp with nice, neat delineations between things. But that's certain. I suppose that's a third parallel really to draw with this video. So check out this channel, and let me know what your thoughts are on my thoughts. It's a bit of pontification, really. Nothing better than a bit of pontification on a Sunday afternoon. Thank you for watching. I'll be back with you in the next one. Rangimarie.